Hi everyone, it's Alex at Risk Academy. Um, at the Archer US Summit, Graham made a very interesting point which I thought deserved a separate video. I'll see if I can catch Graham to talk about that during this week. But if not, I'll try and summarize it. I'll summarize his kind of idea, but I'll add a lot more of my thoughts and experiences on this because that's exactly what I've experienced when I was the head of risk and insurance. And the point he was making is that there's a very nice side effect to quantitative risk analysis. Quantitative risk analysis helps the risk manager, the decision makers, to much better understand the nature of the risk. Because once you start building a model to calculate the risk profile for that specific risk, you either use a bow tie or an influence diagram or a decision tree. In the process of building the bow tie, for example, you go through a lot of different data gathering exercises and you find what are the factors, what are the different controls, how do those factors or drivers affect the control, how do they affect the overall risk exposure. And then you also you cycle through different consequence scenarios, what will happen to the cash flow, what will happen to kind of immediate and the longer term financial implications, what are the consequences. For example, here's an example. We did water pollution, and to me, that just uncovered this risk in a whole new light because I thought it was water pollution had some sort of financial consequence. Well, it's actually much, much more complicated than that because there's a local legislation that explains how the consequence for water pollution is calculated. So we had to read through the legislation to build a proper bow tie diagram. And so the consequences were in fact fines, then damages to the environment and the recovery of the damages, then there was criminal offenses, then there was, and this was the big one, the regulator, the Environmental Protection Agency, had the authority to stop operations for up to 90 days. So it's up to 90 days times your cost of production times the price of the product per day. And that's not a single number, that's a distribution because it's from 0 to 90. And we actually discovered, we actually started collecting data on that to discover that on average, historically, it's actually been around 5 days and it has never been 90 days. However, because one of the big players in the market just had a huge environmental disaster in one of the nearby regions, we had evidence to suggest that the Environmental Protection Agency would be much, much stricter about certain risks. So the probability of maximum consequences was significantly larger today than it was 6 months ago. And so that discovery process first allowed us to build a very nice bow tie, but second, it created so much clarity around what the risk is. And not only for us, we didn't do it ourselves, we did it with the environmental team. And it created a lot of clarity for them as well because they knew the consequences, but they've never really kind of collected the data or monitored the data because we looked through different court cases to discover what the distribution, what the range of the fines was. So the side benefit or side effect of quantitative risk analysis is that it makes you understand the nature of the risk much better, but it also creates a lot of clarity around who's responsible for that risk, who should be responsible for identifying and monitoring and reporting each of the drivers or the factors. And in fact, it changed some of the processes in our organization when we realized that nobody within the environmental team was actually collecting that very important data that should be fed into the model to recalculate risk exposure. And they changed their internal environmental reporting format. So they collected that data, and that data automatically fed into the bow tie model. So the side effect of quantitative risk analysis is that it creates a lot of transparency around what the risk is, and it creates a lot of rigor and accountability around what the drivers for for the risk are. So it's actually much easier to monitor the risk. Let me know what other side effects or benefits, we should really call them, or benefits do you see in quantifying risk analysis. Please write underneath this video in the comments, and if you thought this video was useful, like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next videos.